morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everybody. Thank you for tuning to another Supatease video. We got another round of class tuning that may have just saved a lot of specializations in this update that needed a lot of help. And if you want to make sure that you're staying up to date with news related to World of Warcraft, then smash that subscribe button. Your support is greatly appreciated. But let's get started because there is a lot to cover. Now, for Death Knights specifically, they have done some nerfs and buffs to try and rearrange the power of your hero talents. So Deathbringer for Blood and Frost is receiving some significant nerfs. Reaper's Mark is going to be doing 30% less damage. Exterminate is doing 10% less damage for Blood, and Exterminate is doing 25% less damage for Frost. For the Riders of the Apocalypse, Trollbane's Ice Fury is dealing 35% less damage, but Sand Lane is going to be receiving some buffs in exchange. Vampiric Strike now scales with your Unholy Assault and other similar effects. Visceral Strength granted increased to 6% up from 5, and each stack of Frenzied Bloodthirst Essence of the Blood Queen increases your Death Strike and Coil damage by 3% up from 2. Obviously, the nerfs to these ones seem a lot bigger than the buffs to Sand Lane at this time, but Death Knight was definitely overperforming, so I don't see this as too much of a surprise. Frost Death Knight, overall, all of your abilities are getting reduced by 5%. For Unholy, all of your abilities are being reduced by 10%, but this will be offset at least on Clawing Shadow damage by being increased by 25%. Now, Demon Hunters needed a lot of attention, especially their Fellscarred hero talents, which is what they've done in this update to make it more viable. Demon Surge is going to be doing 80% more damage. Burning Blades damage over time effect has been increased by 50%. Enduring Torment now grants 10% increased Chaos Strike and Blade Dance damage up from 5, and 5% haste up from 3. Student of Suffering bonus mastery effect increased by 50%. Flame Bound now grants 40% increased critical strike damage bonus for Immolation or up from 30. And Monster Rising now increases agility out of demon form by 8% up from 5. For Havoc, all non-hero talent ability damage increased by 13%. Demon Hunters are no longer going to be wet noodles. You guys are very hard noodles now, I think, after this, especially with Fellscarred. I'm definitely going to have to give it a run. For Druid, they reverted some of the nerfs towards their percentage-based healing. Frenzied Regen is no longer a 20% max heal. It's going back to 32, I think. And Renewal is also now a 30% heal, up from 20. Druid of the Claw is receiving some buffs. Obviously, for Feral Druid, it seemed like the Wild Vines was a little better, so let's see what they've done here. Bestial Strength increases Ferocious Bite damage by 8% from 5, and now increases Rampant Ferocity by 8. Feral Ravage damage dealt to other enemies in front of you increased by 25%. Dreadful Wound damage increased by 10, so giving you a little bit of extra AoE with this. Feral Druid is receiving a bit of a damage revamp with this update that we'll get to into a moment. They want to focus more on bleeds. But for Guardian Druid, Boundless Moonlight damage reduced by 70%. Lunar Insight now increases Moonfire damage by 10 down from 20. So nerfs to Elun's Chosen's, buff to Druid of the Claw. I've seen some people saying that Guardian Druid is feeling really weak on the beta. I would honestly have to play it myself to really confirm that 100% or not, because I've seen a lot of people in the pre-patch try and say certain specs are weak, and I know for a fact that they're not, just from having played them. So I'll have to give that a go, but it seems like that's what they're doing here with Guardian. For Feral, Wild Stalker Vines, also for Resto. Bloodseeker Vines damage reduced by 10%. Blood Bursting Growth damage increased by 30, though. And Bond with Nature increases healing received by 4% up from 3. A little bit of a rearrangement there. But for Feral Druid specifically, they're taking damage out of Ferocious Bite and putting more damage into their bleeds. So if you've really liked bleed focused build of Feral Druid, it seems like they are trying to get you more in line with that. With Rip damage increased by 10%, Rampant Ferocity damage increased by 100% up from 50 when players spend extra energy on Ferocious Bite. Taste for Blood increases Ferocious Bite damage by 12 down from 15, and an additional 12 down from 15 during Tiger's Fury. Apex Predator's chance to proc against multiple targets increased slightly. Also, I've noticed that at least in the pre-patch that some armor changes is affecting a lot of physical based classes, much like Feral Druid, where they're doing less damage because they scale armor down with patches to make tanks threatened more by monsters. This has implications on PvP as well. So you're actually probably pretty happy with this 15 into bleed damage, because then if the armor resets at the beginning of the expansion, you're actually going to have some relevant damage. Apex Predator's chance to proc against multiple targets increased slightly. Shred, Swipe, Brutal Slash, Thrash, Lunar Inspiration, Moonfire, and Rake initial damage increased by 30%. That's a significant margin. Berserk now increases all ability and auto attack damage by 15% up from 10. And Berserk Frenzy now causes enemies to bleed for 150% of all direct damage dealt by combo point generating abilities, up from 135%. Primal Wrath direct damage increased by 20, and Adaptive Storm direct damage increased by 20. Just all of your filler stuff. That's going to feel really good, I think, on Feral Druid. For Guardian Druid, seems like the Frenzied Regen is actually still a nerf for you. You're going to be 20% of your health down from 32, but the DPS specs didn't get that nerf. I guess it's the DPS Druids that were complaining about their survivability. They're not going to be affected, but Guardian Druid still will. Dreamer Cenarius increases the healing effective regrowth by 130 down from 200. This is following in line with them trying to make tanks less self-sustainable, I think. Fixes an issue with the increase in the amount of rage required to trigger after the wildfire. Narub 4-set bonus. Arcane damage you deal is increased by 5%, and bleed damage you deal is increased by 8%, up from 5. That's going to buff the Guardian Druid of the Claw build a little bit as well for Guardian with that set bonus change. For hero talents for Evoker, Mass Disintegrate now chains from the Evoker instead of the target, and its range has also been increased by 25 yards, so functionality improvements for Mass Disintegrate. For Devastation, Animosity causes Empower spells to increase the duration of Dragon Rage by 5 seconds, was 4, up to a maximum of 20, up from 16, and Titanic Wrath is now 1 point down from 2. Hunters are receiving a lot of attention here. Dark Ranger really needed some help. I don't know if this is going to be enough, but Black Arrow damage increased by 100%. Shadow Surge damage increased by 50%. Dark Hounds now auto attack as shadow damage. I've still really yet to see these proc a lot, so it's nice they're doing shadow damage to physical. They'll get armor penetration, but I still don't. They're not really procking a lot. Withering Arrow now fires a 4th arrow. The arrows are slightly more staggered in time-wise from each other. I don't know if this is to try and make them more visually noticeable and apparent, and maybe they'll fire it once you don't even notice it. Maybe if they fire once at a time, you see a little bit more of a shadowy effect on your character, or this is purely just like a tuning thing. Hopefully it's a little bit of both. It'll feel better for tuning wise and it'll be more visual. Overshadow now increases the damage of affected abilities by 20%, up from 15. But Dark Ranger was so bad that I don't know if this is enough, so we'll give this a go and see how it feels, but it's nice that it is getting some attention. Symphonic Arsenal damage reduced by 25%, so they're nerfing the Sentinel one. So again, the weaker ones are getting buffed, the stronger ones are getting nerfed. Hopefully this ends up in a place where they're at least closely competitive with each other, and not just kind of like flipping which one's now on top. For marksmanship, wind arrows now fire after you cast aim shot rather than during their cast. Many issues with wind arrows failing to fire or breaking have been resolved. Rapid fire's cooldown between procs of wind arrow has been reduced to 0.2, down from 0.7. For survival, wildfire bomb damage reduced by 5%, flanking strike damage reduced by 5%. I think it's surprising to see some nurses survival here. It was definitely performing really well. For Mage, for Frostfire has been updated to use the Fire Mage's living bomb behaviors and now benefits from talents. That's a big buff to Fire. Excess Fire now applies living bomb at 75% effectiveness, though, for Fire Mages only. We are aware of an issue where Frost Mage's living bomb is also casting at reduced effectiveness, and they're fixing it later. So this is some of the problems of trying to separate the hero talent trees for different specializations, but they're trying to best to stay on top of it so that each spec can feel really powerful. For Frost and Arcane, for Spellslinger, Embedded Splinter's maximum stat count reduced to 8 until Splinter Storm is learned. Controlled Instincts no longer has a damage variance. Controlled Instincts damage is now capped at 5 targets and no longer splashes. Volatile Magic now correctly damages the primary target, having its Embedded Splinters removed. Volatile Magic now deals 1 instance of damage that scales based on the numbers of stacks removed. The changes to Controlled Instincts and Volatile Magic are being made to help reduce the number of damage events and increase performance in high target scenarios. I like this little developer note. For people who don't play Mage or maybe don't even understand this stuff because it's completely new, adding in this little touch here is nice. Frost Splinter damage is getting buffed by 100%. Embedded Frost Splinter damage is getting increased by 100%. And Frost Splinter Storm is getting buffed by 100%. So Frost Mage Spellslinger is really good here, it looks like. Splintering Orbs, Arcane Orb now only grants 2 splinters per target, down from 4. So it seems like a little bit of a nerf for Arcane here as well. Sun Fury for Arcane and Fire. Burden of Power now increases the damage of Arcane Blast by 30, up from 15. Phoenix non-exceptional spell increased by 20%. Phoenix Greater Pyroblast increased by 30%. And Phoenix Arcane Surge damage increased by 100%. So Sun Fury got a lot of buffs. For Arcane, though, oh my god, what is that? Arcane Barrage damage reduced by 65%, but Arcane damage per Arcane charge increased by 90%, up from 30. So they don't want you just spamming Arcane Barrages with no stacks, I think is what they're doing here. They want you to get some charges before you start firing these off. Arcane Blast damage increased by 10%. Concentration now procs 3 times per minute, up from 2. Arcane Echo now has a 0.2 second cooldown between procs, and Arcane Echo damage increased by 25%. So trying to make it a little bit less spammy here, and make it more focused on like big payouts when you get to max charges. Pyroblast damage for fire increased by 5%. Phoenix Flames damage 10%. Fireball damage 20%. Flame Strike 10%. Quick Flame Strike damage bonus increased to 25%, so 5%. Flame Patch damage increased by 30%. Living Bomb increased by 100%. Living's bomb's frequency has been creating performance issues in high target scenarios. The following changes are targeted at reducing damage events while only marginally affecting throughput. We'll be keeping an eye on how these changes affect Fire Mage, and we'll make adjustments as necessary. So Fire was really good in AoE situations, but outside of that wasn't spectacular. So it seems like they're on top of that. They want to rein that in a little bit. It's a little too good in AoE and not good enough outside of it. All talents that affect Lit Fuse proc rate have been reduced by 50%. Lit Fuse, Explosive Ingenuity, Explosivo. Explosivos living bomb damage increased during combustion, reduced to 40 from 50. Talents that guaranteed living bomb gain a lot of power from these changes, so we're adjusting them to compensate. Deep impacts cooldown reduced to 10 from 15. Living bomb is now capped at 8 targets and no longer splashes. Ooh. Living bomb visuals now have been reduced visual fidelity in raid groups. All right, no more big living bomb combos, it looks like. Frost Mage are getting some nice buffs. Ice Lance, 10%. Glacial Spike, 10%. Flurry, 12%. Blizzard, 50%. Frozen Orb, 10%. Comet Storm, 10%. Splintering Rays, Ray of Frost damage increased by 5%. Splitting Ice Lance damage to nearby enemies increased to 90 from 80. Cone of Cold damage is increased by a 100%. I do wonder if Cone of Cold actually becomes more of a rotational ability or not, as there are some Cone of Cold builds, especially ones with resetting Frozen Orb. That could actually be pretty fun with this. Brewmaster's balance increases Monk's armor by 45 down from 50. Increase the amount of damage staggered, reduced to 5 from 8. Again, this is reducing the power of tanks to try and make healers have to heal them again. Shield of Righteous for prop paladins, or all paladins, sorry. Increases your armor by 160% of your strength up from 150. For Templars, Hammer of Light now costs 3 holy power down from 5. For Holy Shock is getting an 8% nerf. Word of Glory is getting a 13% nerf. I think it's not surprising to see this. However, the hero talents are what's doing a significant amount of Holy Paladin's healing. So I think Word of Glory is affected by that, though, as it converts into the heal over time effect. For Prot, Word of Glory is increased by 300% based on your missing health, buffed up from 250. Bulwark of Order now shields you for 60% of your Avenger shield up from 50, so a little bit of a Prot Paladin buff. Oracle Priest here for Holy and Discipline. Resolve some issues with Premonition. Premonition of Solace absorb value increased by 40%. Premonition of Piety now increases healing done by 15% from 10. Premonition of Piety now redistributes 70% of the overhealing up from 50 for up to 4 nearby allies, up from 3. Resolved an issue causing Premonition Insight to not work with Rapture. So a lot of quality of life improvements here for Oracle and some significant buffs. For Discipline Priest, Preventative Measures now increases the Absorb Shield by 25% from 15. Preventative Measures now increases the damage of Penance, Smite, and Holy Nova by 25 up from 15. And Preemptive Care now increases the duration of Atonement by 3 up from 1. Assured Safety now applies 4 stacks of Prayer of Mending up from 2. For Holy Priest, so Disc Priest buffs. Holy Priest, a Preventative Measures now increases the healing done by Prayer of Mending by 25 up from 15. Assured Safety now applies a Power Word Shield at 100% effectiveness up from 25. And Preemptive Care now increases the duration of Renew by 6 up from 3. Preemptive Care now also applies the duration of Renew from Revitalizing Prayers and Lightwell. Interesting. That's going to be a lot of GCDs saved there with like auto renew applications. Rapture cooldown now starts when pressed, and it lasts up to 30 seconds. They've changed Rapture to have like a certain number of shields that you can cast. So this is going to be a little bit more quality of life. You're going to get it back faster. Rogue's finally getting some attention. Fatebound. Hands of Fate's Heads effect now grants 10% increased damage on its first flip up from 3. And Rogues were tickling people. They needed this. For Outlaw, Nimble Flurry now increases Blade Flurry damage by 20% while active up from 15. For Subtlety, Nimble Flurry now flurries 50% of noted ability damage while active up from 40. For Assassination, you're getting a 4% overall increase in damage, a 10% increase to auto attack, 10% increase to Envenom, 10% increase to Crimson Tempest. For Outlaw, you're getting a 10% increase to all your spells, auto attacks, Sinister Strike, Pistol Shot, Blade Flurry, initial damage increased by 50%, Sleight of Hand additional chance for Roll the Bones to grant multiple effects increased by 15 up from 10, Count the Odds chance to grant a Roll the Bones effect increased to 15 up from 10. Big buffs to Rogue. Auto attacks for Subtlety increased by 10%, Eviscerate by 10%, Black Powder by 10%. Stone Bulwark for Shaman is going to a 3-minute cooldown, which I believe means now that you can no longer reset it. However, it is getting significantly buffed. Stone Bulwark's just really good into damage over time effects. I think that's where it's going to be slotting in. And then outside of that, or if it can be purged or spell stolen, it gets pretty weak in PvP situations. But no more double reset here for this one. For Farseer, resolved an issue with Ancestors, so quality of life improvements. Lava Burst from Ancestors and getting, oh my god, Ellie's getting a buff. Are you joking? Lava Burst damage from Ancestors increased by 25%. Chain Lightning damage from them increased by 50%. Healing Surge from Ancestors increased by 60. Your NS is 30 seconds down from 45. Heed My Call now increases the duration of Ancestors by 4 up from 2. Ancient Fellowship now has a 20% chance to trigger up from 15, and Ancient Fellowship is now less random. So some of these talent trees that are more powerful in PvP are way weaker in PvE. And what we're noticing is the talent trees that are powerful in PvE are weak in PvP. And they're nerfing the ones that are strong in PvE and buffing the ones that are weak in PvE, meaning the PvP ones are getting even better. And then the PvE ones are getting worse. I'm imagining that Stormcaller here is probably getting nerfed. Stormcaller now increases the critical strike chance of nature spells by 5%, down from 10. And I was right. Tempest secondary cleave damage lowered by 50, down from 70. Unlimited power reduced from 3% haste per stack to 1% per stack. Arc discharge lowered to 2. Chain lightnings down from 3. Oh my god. Stormbringer got just absolutely destroyed. Meanwhile, Farseer, which was already likely better for Ellie and Resto at least, poor enhancements. That's a Ripperino. Conductive Energy's Lightning Rod variant is now 10% of the damage transfer, down for 20. For Totemic Enhancement Shamans, Tremor is now going to deal Flame Strike damage. Surging Totem's Tremor frequency is now affected by haste, and Tremor damage has been also reduced by 35%. I don't know what the Flame Strike does, if this scales like your Mastery better or something like that. For Restoration Shaman, Imbuement Mastery now increases the duration of Earth Living Weapon by 3, down from 6. Chain heals from Lively Totems no longer consume Whirling Air, Nature Swiftness, Tidal Waves, or Tidebringer, so quality of life bug fixes. Healing Surge casts while Whirling Air and Spirit Walker's Tidal Totem are active, no longer consume Whirling Air. Healing spells cast while Whirling Air and Nature Swiftness is active, no longer consume Whirling Air. So just bug fixes, a little nerf to Earth Living Weapon. Rest of Shaman still looks really powerful with the rework that they got earlier on. Thunderstrike Ward now has its own spell visual. It's still not really doing any damage though. So, I mean, it's cool it gets its visual, but it's not doing damage. An issue with Thunderstrike Ward drop off has been fixed. Earthquake now triggers Storm Frenzy on cast only. An issue of Fusion of Elements buff activating from Ice Fury Override instead of cast has been fixed. Bug fixes for Elemental, little visual improvement. Enhancement Fire and Ice now properly buffs Primordial Wave. Nature's Fury now properly affects Primordial Wave. And Primordial Wave's baseline buff lowered to 250 from 500%. Primordial Wave now properly scales with Enhancement Shaman's Mastery and Elemental Spirits, Elemental Damage buffs. This is where having like a developer note, because like this seems like it got nerfed significantly, but that nerf also got offset by these other effects. So hard to say whether or not that's going to feel significant. Tidebringer is no longer consumed. A Chain Heal is cast while Nature Swiftness or Ancestral Swiftness is active. Bug fixes the rest of Shaman as well. Earth Living Weapons heal over time effect is now 6, down from 12, and healing has been increased though by 75%. It's going to be more bursty. Undulation can no longer trigger from additional healing waves from Primordial Wave. Undulation now displays highlights of Healing Surge or Healing Wave when it's triggered instead of being consumed immediately. Now this means less bursty Primordial Wave NS healing waves is what I'm assuming. This could be a significant nerf. For Warlock Hellcaller, Seeds of their Demise have been modified to reduce lucky and unlucky streaks when granting Flashpoint or Tormented Crescendo. Zevrim's Resilience healing has been increased by 800%. For Affliction, Soul Conduit now has a 5% chance to refund a Soul Shard, down from 10. Fixed an issue where Tormented Crescendo was not correctly checking if the target had Unstable Affliction, Corruption, Wither, and Agony. Fixed an issue where Call of the Week was not correctly increasing damage to the first 4 targets, affected by Malefic Rapture. So just bug fixes all around, quality of life improvements, buffs for a lot of classes, a couple of nerfs as well for overperformers. For Demonology, fixed an issue when Impending Doom would not summon an Imp when Doom expired. This is the type of stuff that needs to get cleaned up. Like, this thing is just not doing what it says it does. Destruction, Rain of Fire damage, buffed by 35. Demon Fire, 25%. Fixed an issue where Power Overwhelming incorrectly gave 1% mastery instead of 0.5, so a little bit of a nerf here with this bug fix. Fixed an issue where 3 stacks of Power Overwhelming were granted when using Rain of Fire while talented into Infernal. Soul Conduit now has a 5% chance of refunding a Soul Shard, down from 10, though. So some AoE damage buffs for destruction, but shard generation is going down. For Warrior, they've reverted the nerf to Impending Victory. It's going to heal for max value, at least for DPS Warriors, but not for Prot Warriors. Tank specs still getting gutted. Removed Artisan's Acuity for one-time outdoor profession treasure, so crafters are able to start with relatively the same amount of Acuity to begin their crafting journey. 200 Artisan's Acuity has been added to the starter. Okay, this is just a crafting change. PvP changes. Necrotic Aura is gone. It's been deleted. Feels bad. That was like a cool reason to bring like a Death Knight to like BG stuff or mass group content. Feels bad. Demon Hunter, Rain from Above is going to a 90-second up from 60-second cooldown. I'm surprised. And Chaotic Imprint has been removed. This was another, I guess they're removing damage modifiers from PvP talents. Because this increased magic damage. Necrotic Aura increased magic damage. It'd be nice if they had like a note here to say like, this is like me just noticing the trend that they're removing these effects. Lightsmith, Fear No Evil now reduces the duration of fear effects only by 10%, down from 50. So this is the PvP talent. Paladins would be on half fears. They're not going to be. Holy Bulwark's Absorb is no longer reduced by 50% PvP combat. Holy Shock's Healing is no longer buffed by 15% PvP combat. Justicar's Vengeance is no longer reduced by 40% for Ret. Truce Wake is no longer reduced by 25% for Ret. Searing Light is no longer reduced by 20% for Ret. And Divine Storm damage is no longer reduced by 8% for Ret. So they're rewinding some of the PvP modifiers that were applied in Dragonflight where it makes sense. I think this is what they've been doing every patch so far. For Shaman, Totem of Wrath, now critical strike damage and healing is only 15% down from 20. I expected this to get nerfed. It seemed really good now having it in your Primal Wave, getting that 2-tap increase from Primal Wave damage or healing, and also the crit effect. Soul Swap is coming back. It's not coming back the way that I wish that it was, though. Affliction already has a huge amount of high priority PvP talents that makes it really tough to be able to take it as a standalone. It's going to copy your damage over time effects and haunt from the target, preserving the duration. Your next use of Soul Swap within 10 seconds exhales those copies. I would have really liked this to be on, I think it's called Rampant Afflictions, where it lets you put Unstable Affliction on multiple targets. The reason I think Soul Swap should be baked into that is because the only time you're going to play Soul Swap is when you take that. And that talent, unless you're playing some weird single target version of Affliction, is pretty much mandatory for the AoE playstyle of the spec, which Soul Swap will also feel mandatory for, without having to lose a lot of the other ones. It's just Affliction, Honor talents are super competitive. It's hard to slot this in. It's good that it's there, especially in situations where you're 100% going to need it, where it's like really difficult to cast. But I would have rather been baked into the Rampant Afflictions PvP talent rather than being a separate one. But it seems like this was a really solid update. A lot of classes that needed attention got it. And I'm sure that they're going to continue with this, as they have said in their interviews. So I'm curious to see what the next one will bring. Aside from that, thank you guys very much for watching the video, and I will see you in the next one.